Good afternoon, everyone. It's 1:30. My name is Carolyn Laron, and I'm the project manager responsible for this meeting. Can everyone hear me okay? If you could just raise your hand or give a thumbs up, great.
Yeah, I can hear you, Carolyn.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So for today's meeting, there is quite a bit of interest, and so I am going to be muting folks that are joining the meeting just so that we are all focused on the speakers at hand. Members of the public, you will be given an opportunity towards the end of the business portion where you may unmute yourself at that time. So with that, I'll go ahead and begin. Andrew, do you have all the folks on your end? Or are we still waiting for some other folks?
It looks like we have everyone. We're trying to get set up in a conference room, so we might need a second just for that. But we can go ahead and get started. We have everyone to at least start the meeting now.
Okay. Just give me a. Let me take a quick look and see if we have all of the NRC staff that I'm expecting. Sorry if you could just bear with me. Yeah. All right, do one more check. Yep, okay, great. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Carolyn Laron. I am the project manager in the licensing and regulatory infrastructure branch at the NRC responsible for this meeting. Today's observation virtual pre-application public meeting is to discuss questions SMR Holtec has on the limited work authorization or LWA process. We welcome members of the public, including representatives from the media and local government, for observing the pre-application meeting. At the end of the business portion of the meeting, we will provide an opportunity to those observing to make comments on the topic discussed or to ask questions of the NRC staff. Pre-application engagements like this meeting provide an opportunity for early discussions with a potential applicant to offer licensing guidance and to identify potential licensing issues early in the licensing process. The NRC has not received an application for the SMR-160 design and is not evaluating any final design information. Before we begin with opening remarks and introductions, a few reminders. Please put your microphone on mute if you are not already on mute, unless you are speaking. Please state your name and organization before asking a question or making a comment. Please only use the meeting chat for logistics information. Please do not provide any comments in the chat. For members of the public, I will put in the chat the links to the meeting materials, which are also found on the public meeting notice at the very bottom under related documents. Give me a second. I will put those links in now into the chat. Uh-oh. All right, if you give me a couple of seconds, there are a few folks in the lobby that I need to admit. All right, okay, I think I've admitted them. And I think you all should have the information in the chat. Let me just check one more time. Yeah, okay. All right. So I'd like to now invite Michelle Hayes, the Chief of the Licensing and Regulatory Infrastructure Branch, to give opening remarks on behalf of the NRC staff, followed by Andrew Brenner, the Director of SMR-160 Licensing, to provide his opening remarks. Michelle?
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to all. I'm excited that so many people are interested in this topic. So I'm Michelle Hayes. I'm the branch chief responsible for licensing the Holtec small modular reactor, and I work in the Office of Nuclear Reactor Regulation, hence the NRR up there. Today, we're going to discuss limited work authorizations, or LWAs. For those not familiar with the concept, LWAs allow certain construction activities to start before a construction permit or combined license is issued. The specific activities that can be performed are described in the NRC regulations and include things such as driving of piles and placement of backfill or concrete. All activities performed under an LWA are at the licensee's risk, and the LWA application itself requires a redress plan should the activities be terminated by the holder or revoked by the NRC. This is our first meeting with Holtec on LWAs, and we appreciate their willingness to engage with us early on this topic. We look forward to their presentation and the opportunity for the NRC to provide feedback and seek clarification. Andrew.
Thanks, Michelle. Can you guys hear me okay now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I'm Andrew Brenner. I'm the Director of Licensing for the SMR project. I really just want to say I appreciate the chance for the staff that's given us today to ask some very initial questions on the scope of what's possible with a limited work authorization. You know, we're really trying to use this opportunity to use it as a fact-finding mission to understand, you know, what flexibility is within the current regulation, what the staff expectations are for compiling an application like this to understand if it's something that we want to pursue in the future. So I'll iterate or reiterate there that this isn't an application that we are certain that we're going to go and put in place for the potential plan to put some SMRs at the Palisades site, but we do want to understand how this process would work, what the expectations are, and what potential benefit it might offer SMR going forward. So again, I appreciate the staff's opportunity to have this very initial conversation to figure out what the scope of an LWA for SMRs at Palisades might look like. Carol, I guess I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thank you. So now I'll call on the NRC staff who will be primarily speaking at this meeting. We'll start, sorry, I went ahead and I introduced myself, Carolyn Laron. You heard from Michelle Hayes. India Banks.
Hello, my name is India Banks, and I'm a project manager in the Licensing and Regulatory Infrastructure branch at the NRC as well. And I will be conducting the slides for this meeting.
Thank you, India. Laura Willingham.
Hi, Laura Willingham, Environmental Project Manager with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I am helping to support this meeting to answer National Environmental Policy Act or NEPA questions related to the potential LWA request.
Thank you, Laura. Peyton Daub.
Good afternoon. My name is Peyton Daub. I'm an environmental scientist and project manager with the Environmental Center of Expertise, and I'm here to answer questions concerning NEPA.
Great, thank you. So we do have other NRC staff also listening in, and we may call upon them as needed as the discussion progresses. So Andrew, if you want to go ahead and introduce the SMR Holtec staff with you.
Yeah, sure. So again, I'm Andrew Brenner, Director of Licensing for SMR. And we're with me at Bart Shurtleff. He's going to be leading the discussion today. He's a licensing engineer within our licensing group. I see Justin Hawkins is on the phone. He's the managing director for the SMR project. I also see Dave Lewis, our senior director for safety and operations. Chase Allen's our lead project manager. And Rick Trotta is our director for the balance of plant design. I can see there's a handful of other folks as well on the call from Holtec. I'll just ask you guys if you have a need to speak up, just feel free to introduce yourself before you do so.
Great, thank you. So I think India has the slides up. Hopefully all of you can see it. I did put in the chat the two links, both to the meeting slides and also the paper that was accompanying the meeting presentation. So if Andrew, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Yeah, sure. Hey, this is Bart Shurtleff. As Andrew mentioned, I'm a licensing engineer here at Holtec. We can go on to slide 2. We've kind of gone through our introductions. So we're here to talk about LWA, just in broad strokes, we're going to be talking about the requirements. Obviously, we don't have plans for to submit an LWA application at this time. So we're really just seeking clarification on the requirements and how we kind of what latitude that sort of application would provide for you. So we can go to slide 3. Right, so we've got kind of three broad areas that we're talking about. The understanding the LWA submittal pathways, discussing the expectations around content, and then talking about the limitations on what sort of activities fit in the LWA space. Kind of preparing for this meeting, we try to do our best to review all of the relevant regulations. So that's within several areas of 10 CFR. Carolyn kindly directed us to the Federal Register notice associated with the 2007 update to the LWA regulations. So we reviewed that Federal Register notice, kind of see what we could take from that. And then we reviewed the AP 1000 and the carbon-free power plan LWA applications. I guess AP 1000, I should say the Vogel LWA application. And we'll note that our situation is slightly different from those two, whereas those two were kind of operating in Part 52 space. We are intending to operate more in Part 51 space. So there are some slight differences, Part 50 space. My apologies. So slight differences in kind of how the applications would go. So what we're hoping to get out of this, we're hoping to kind of gain a little bit of clarity on the review process, understand the expectations for content, and then understand a little bit better limitations. So we can go on to slide 4. All right, so as we said, we are considering an LWA. We haven't kind of made any decisions on that yet. We understand that there are 2 pathways for submitting an LWA. The first of these is to submit a complete application. So you would be at the same time submitting a construction permit application or CPA and a limited work authorization application as part of that completed application. So one of our questions on this is kind of understanding a little bit the relative timelines for those reviews and adjudications. The NRC website kind of advertises roughly 36 months for either an LWA or a CPA. As the LWA would kind of be a subset of the CPA content, our expectation is that if you submit both at once, it doesn't expand to kind of a 72-month review. But we don't have a great feel for what might be reasonable to expect. So I guess we're hoping that the NRC could comment on what the relative timelines are like, and also if you can provide any perspective on kind of how the LWA content gets prioritized in the overall review of the CPA.
So this is Carolyn Laron, so I'll go ahead and address that. So you are correct. The NRC public site does show that the LWA review and the construction permit review each have a generic schedule to be completed within 36 months. The intent is to provide the LWA with either a standalone or included with the construction permit application submitted at the same time. Certainly, we understand that the LWA would take priority in terms of review, but that doesn't mean that the construction permit review for other aspects that are not within the scope of the LWA could not also be reviewed at the same time. With respect to, I think you had mentioned that you had reviewed, sorry, was there a comment from someone or? No? Okay. So with respect to, I think you had mentioned you had reviewed other LWA schedules and such. So I'd like to briefly address that. Certainly, right, those generic schedules are based generically what we anticipate would be the review. In the case that you had mentioned for the carbon-free power project, the schedule information was just acceptance review and acceptance schedule was recently issued, and that was based on their extensive pre-application engagement. And so likewise for any applicant that comes in with any application, including an LWA, extensive pre-application engagement does support a more efficient review. I will also note that the NRC is looking at the more recent, the lessons learned from the more recently issued construction permit for the Kairos application to see what efficiencies we can gain from that as well. So did that answer your question, Clark?
Carolyn, this is Andrew. I have
Sure.
a follow-up to that. I guess maybe one of the things that I'm looking to understand would be, if we were to go this route and submit an LWA as part of or in conjunction with a construction permit application, is there any thought from the staff that would also delay the review of the construction permit application as well? And really, I guess we're trying to understand, again, that relative timeline of if getting approval of an LWA and approval of the CPA, that earlier approval of the LWA, those portions that are identified within that LWA, that's the benefit from the applicant's viewpoint, in that we would be able to start specific construction activities sooner. So we're just trying to understand, I guess, also the follow-on consequences to further delaying the CPA review cycle as well. And again, just trying to make sure that we have the full picture in our minds for what potential benefit there might be to this potential pathway of submitting an LWA concurrent with the CPA.
Yeah, so what I can offer is I think it's difficult for us to speculate on that. I think, understanding what your business case is, what plans you have, what your construction goals and schedule are, would also help inform the review. I think that as your design matures and as you settle on that, on the goals for your construction, I think we can, and certainly future pre-application engagements on this topic will certainly help as well. I know that's not a fruitful answer, but it really is difficult for us to say, what the schedule would be when we don't really have enough information to base that on.
That's understandable, and I guess I'm not necessarily looking for the NRC to sign up to specific review times, especially without understanding what the application would consist of. But I guess maybe, is it a fair assumption that the CPA review would be delayed as a result of reviewing the LWA at the same time?
So I wouldn't necessarily use the word delay. I think that, I'm sorry, I am speaking from the safety perspective. We do also have an environmental perspective. So I'll open it up to either Laura or to Peyton.
Yeah, so thanks, Carolyn. I don't know if I would use the word delay either, but from a NEPA perspective, the LWA and the CP, if you did them separate reviews with separate NEPA, you would have two EISs, and you can't start the EIS for the CPA until you've issued the draft EIS for the LWA, because they tier off of each other, like the CP tiers off of the LWA. So there has to be some amount of progress made before we could start that other review to tier off of the first NEPA review.
So that helps my understanding a little bit, and maybe just to clarify that, I guess I think ask this a little bit later in the presentation as well, but it sounds like anything that would be reviewed in the LWA would also be then re-reviewed as part of the CPA.
So I could answer, this is Carolyn Laron again, I can speak from the safety perspective. So certainly the information that's reviewed, you're submitting it concurrently, right? You're providing both the LWA and the CPA at the same time. So the staff will have all of that information available to them. And while their focus may be on the LWA and completing that task to meet, the construction goals, or to help support those construction goals and schedule that you have, the staff does have all that information. So other aspects of the construction permit application review can continue, right? And those that are not within the scope of the LWA. If you were to, for example, submit the LWA earlier than the construction permit application, right? when you submit, so the LWA review will begin, right? It will continue. When your CPA comes in, the staff will review the CPA for those aspects of the construction permit application that have interfaces with the LWA scope. The staff will have to consider that, right? If it is bounding, et cetera. So that aspect, you know, if you're asking if we're going to re-review the information in the LWA, no. But it is an awareness, right, that, you know, aspects of the LWA are still interfacing with the information in the construction permit application. Does that make sense?
I guess I just clarify, Carolyn, you're talking about the PSAR specifically.
Yes, correct. I'm sorry, the safety aspects. Yes. I think Peyton has his hand up. Go ahead, Peyton.
I was just going to add that from an environmental perspective, issues that are addressed in the LWA, we could incorporate by reference the information when we do the EIS for the CP. So it would not be like you'd have to re-describe and we'd have to reassess those impacts.
Yeah, so it's a very similar situation to the safety side. It's more like what Carolyn was saying, right? It would be verification that the conclusions haven't changed.
Yes, we would look at
and then we can incorporate it by reference, like Peyton said. Yeah. Sorry, Peyton.
Okay, that definitely helps clear that up. I guess just to repeat that back in brief and make sure that I'm understanding it properly. Whether you submit when you submit it all at once, or I guess regardless, the LWA and the CPA will in total cover the same amount of material as submitting a CPA without an LWA, but you would be adding some amount of administrative burden because you have to submit an EIS for the LWA portion and then a second EIS for the CPA portion, but the grand total of the impacts would be the same. Is that roughly right?
That is roughly right. I do want to point out in the regulations, there is discussion of if you submit them both at the same time, you know, if an applicant in coordination with the staff, it's really the applicant's choice. There could be one EIS, like that is written in the regulations.
Right.
So
right.
I mean,
Okay.
as part of future discussions, if this is something you want to explore more, like we can talk more about that and the timing and.
Right. Okay. I may be mixed up, but I thought that was also true if you submitted them in parts, as long as you submitted your complete environmental report with the first part. But that's kind of a little bit deeper in the nitty gritty. I don't think we need to really explore that quite so deeply yet.
This is Peyton. Your statement that it wouldn't involve more analytical work, but it could involve more administrative work, I think is spot on. You know, that if you do the LWA and CP as separate applications with separate EISs, no, there won't be repeat analysis, but there would be a certain amount of additional administrative work that the staff would have to perform.
Okay. Excellent. Just taking notes here. Thanks for helping us clear that up. Okay, so
this is Andrew Brenner again. From an administrative standpoint, just so we have a clear understanding of the two pathways available to us and understanding how they've been applied. For example, the carbon-free power project is that LWA considered? I guess our pathway too, we haven't put up on the screen yet, but that's. They submitted the LWA separately from their COLA application that's anticipated to come in. Is that the right takeaway for us as well?
This is Carolyn Laron. I'm sorry, Andrew, could you say that one more time? I'm not sure I understood. Are you asking is the carbon-free power project LWA, was that submitted separately from the combined license application? Is that what you were asking? Right. Or? Right. Yeah. So I don't think the combined operating license application has been received yet.
That's correct.
right? It is
No,
just
it
the
hasn't.
LWA.
The LWA is presently under review, and I don't think the COL application is going to come in until next year.
That is my understanding as well. Yes, the LWA is in house. The COL is not in house for review yet. It has not been submitted.
Right. So if you go to this next slide on slide 5, I just want to make sure that we're saying the same thing, that the pathway that the CFPP is taken is consistent with this pathway we've identified. It at least in terms of a Part 52 application with a COLA instead of a CPA.
That is what made sense for that particular project in coordination with, NRC and DOE. That there was a lot of pre-application, as Carolyn and Michelle mentioned, on that particular project. So without understanding the particulars of this particular project, you guys would have to decide what it makes the best sense for you. But
yeah, absolutely. I'm just trying to make sure I understand the paths that have been taken previously already. So okay, thank you.
Just if you're just looking for history, Vogel submitted an LWA while their COL was already in house. So there's been various ways that this has been submitted in the past, not just CFPP. So I just wanted to be clear on that. There are other applicants who have done it and have done it differently than CFPP.
Although, just to follow on, there has not been a lot of LWA history to rely on. It's been used just a few times.
Yep, that's part of why we're chatting with you guys. All right, so I think we covered this part. At the very least, we covered this part for the environmental aspect. I guess, Carolyn, just in brief, can you confirm for us that the
Sure.
Safety aspect would be essentially approached the same way as the environmental aspect here?
Right. Yeah. So yes. So this is Carolyn Leron. Yes, it would be approached the same way, right? So the staff will have available the information, right, with the on the LWA, as well as the information on the other parts of the construction permit application. So there won't be a re-review, but there is an understanding of interfaces, for example, of the information that is within the scope of the LWA and other parts of the construction permit application.
And I'm wondering, Carolyn, what do you think about the administrative burden on the safety side? I'm sort of inclined to say it'll be less than the environmental side, but I don't know.
Well, I think that administrative burden in terms of like the processing of it, right? So the staff also conducts a safety review. We also issue an evaluation, evaluation associated with the LWA, right? So I would consider it similar, right? There's still an administrative burden there with issuing it. Right, and of course, right, there is the opportunities for hearing, right, for both the LWA and the CPA.
Okay, yeah, no, thank you. That clarified it.
Okay.
I was wrong.
Oh, no. Sorry, I wasn't clear. Okay.
All right, very good. Well, thanks. That I think we kind of already covered this then, and then so we can move on to slide 6 then. Okay, so we kind of talked about the application pathways, and we're going to talk about content. So we understand we would need to submit an environmental report. We need to submit a safety analysis report, provide some additional information. So as far as the reports that we would be submitting for an LWA application, our understanding is that they would be equivalent to a construction permit application as far as content, level of detail, and design maturity. And I guess when I say level of detail and design maturity, I'm talking about some of the guidance that's available that says, CP information in general is preliminary, and in many cases it can cover kind of analytical methods when results from those analyses aren't quite ready yet, and that in some cases preliminary design information is acceptable, and final design information, it is understood, will be provided as part of the operation, as part of the OLA. So we may want to hold off on this question until after the next couple of slides to talk about it a little bit more. But if this is an easy one for the NRC to answer, open to hearing an answer earlier.
So this is Carolyn Leron again. I'm not really sure if it's an easy answer, and
Okay.
it may be also repeated for the next two slides. But I would like to reference, right, the Federal Register notice. I think
Yeah.
I did put in the chat the Federal Register notice. If you go to page 5743, 433, 57433, the bottom of the first column and into the second column, it talks about the expectations of the information to be submitted associated with the LWA. And I will just read it out, right? The safety analysis report, which may be a standalone document or incorporated into the construction permit or combined license, preliminary or final safety analysis report as applicable, must describe the LWA activities that the applicant seeks to perform, provide the final design for the structures to be constructed under the LWA and a safety analysis for those portions.
So,
To provide a safety analysis for the design demonstrating, right, the activities will be conducted in accordance with the applicable commission safety requirements.
Right. Okay, yeah, so this is one of the places where we definitely wanted to get some clarity, and that portion specifically is a part where it's a little bit confusing. So I guess let's step through the next couple of slides, and then we can I'll kind of rephrase my question. Is that
Sure.
okay?
That's fine.
Okay, very good. So we're kind of considering how much design information is needed, right? You gave us, the Federal Register notice has some information about that. The regulation, and this isn't a direct quote from the regulation, but is pretty close. So 10 CFR 5010 talks about providing design and construction information that would otherwise be required for a CPA, but limited to the portions of the facility that are within the scope of the LWA. To me, that kind of jives with the idea that you could submit an LWA and a CPA as one application, or that you would be submitting the LWA as part one of a two-part CPA. It seems kind of odd that you would be required to submit final design information in part one of a two-part CPA when the part two of the CPA would not require final design information. And so if you were to cover the same construction activities in just a construction permit, you wouldn't be required, preliminary design information would be acceptable. But once you convert it to an LWA, it flips to become final design information. So we were somewhat confused by that. And so as we point out here in Reg Guide 1206, it provides some additional discussion about LWAs, and it requires, similar to the Federal Register notice, requires final design information. Our interpretation of kind of both the Federal Register notice and the Reg Guide 1206 guidance is that, these were written with Part 52 in mind, and with the understanding that you were going to have final design information already at the time you're submitting the LWA, whereas within Part 50 space, since you're submitting it as part of a CPA, or as either as part one of a two-part CPA or coincide it with a CPA, that the level of detail and design maturity consistent with the CPA is what's appropriate. So I guess that's kind of where our confusion is, and so can you kind of explain a little bit why it would make sense to if you submitted it just as a CPA, preliminary information would be acceptable, but once you pull it out, you switch to needing final design information.
So I can't speak to the frame of mind when they promulgated the rule, right? So what I can point to is that I think that they did consider both construction permit and COL applicants when they promulgated the rule, right? Throughout that Federal Register notice, it talks about, construction permit and COL. With respect to the final design information, it is only for those portions, right, or for those structures that are within the scope of the LWA, right? So other parts of your construction permit application, are okay to be, preliminary, right? But for those structures, right, within the scope, and the applicant would determine what that scope would be, right? They would need to provide, that final design information for that structure and analysis for it. With respect to the reg guide 1.206, you're correct that reg guide is geared towards the Part 52 process, where a final design is under review or is considered for the licensing aspects within that part. So I think that, maybe, as I mentioned early on, once, you've considered further, and we've also had some time to understand what, your business case is, what goals you have for your construction, I think that this might be another opportunity for us to further engage in the future.
Okay, I guess, sorry, someone else. Sorry.
Yeah, this is Michelle Hayes, and I would offer that I understand what you're saying, and we're struggling with the same thing ourselves. It's not an easy question to answer. What Carolyn said is totally true. There's one place that it says final design for those portions in the LWA, and another place where it indicates that it's just the scope needed in the CPA. So this is one of the questions that we can't give you a definitive answer on today. We can engage further once we have a little more specific details on what your plans are.
I guess let's step to the next slide, and we can kind of keep this discussion going. So we're trying to kind of lay out a scenario. So a typical LWA your containment's going to be your deepest excavation. If we were to pursue an LWA to build a containment foundation, we need this sort of information. And so my understanding is that if we were to submit just a CPA that has everything, we would be able to give you preliminary information about our containment preliminary design information on all of these topics, and we would go forth. We could, if that construction permit was approved, we'd go out and construct and then submit an operating license with final design information at some point in the future. But if we labeled some portion of that in LWA, merely by applying that label, we would require to have final design information, then we would proceed as normal, do the same construction. There would be no difference in any of the subsequent actions up to submitting the operating license. And so the facts on the ground would be no different. It would merely be a change in label from CP to LW, from construction permit to LWA. So our understanding is that merely that change in label, according to the Federal Register notice and to Reg Guide 1.206, is sufficient to change the level of design information required. Is that correct?
So,
okay.
like I said, I would say I understand what you're saying, and I don't have an answer for you. I do know Reg Guide 1.206's guidance. My impression is mainly written for Part 52. I would go back to the FRN and what that says, and I just don't think we have an answer.
Okay, I guess part of the reason we're pushing on this is and are kind of hesitant to delay an answer to a future engagement is because our decision making about whether to go further down this path is dependent on the answer, and so we're kind of struggling. If it is correct that we're going to need final design information, then we are less likely to pursue an LWA. And so there wouldn't be an opportunity for future engagement because we wouldn't pursue that path. And so that's kind of the bind that we feel that we're in a little bit. We're struggling to, a decision about whether to continue this process and have future engagements is dependent on the answers to these sorts of questions. And if it's not possible to answer this, then we'll take that on board and make our decisions accordingly.
So I'm not saying it can't be answered. I'm saying we can't answer it today. I do think it would be more helpful if you made a proposal as to what you wanted to do and why you thought it was appropriate, and we could evaluate that in a white paper or something. But I do think, Carolyn, did you want to talk about risk?
Yes. Well, I want to talk about a couple things. So this is Carolyn Leron again. So the LWA is not just about the structures, right? There's also, aspects of preparing the site, right, for the future build. So that is also within the scope. So I don't know if that's something, so you could still pursue an LWA, right, for those aspects or those activities, right, that are described in 10 CFR 50.10 D. So you could, right? So of course that's your decision to make, and how that would fit into your overall construction goals and schedule. With respect to risks, I think, right, we would be remiss to not mention that, and the regulations do call it out, right? The pursuit of an LWA is completely at the risk of the applicant, and that may also have been a consideration in the promulgation of the rule, and for that desire to have that final design information only for those aspects or those structures that are within the scope of the LWA. And so I'll say it again, like other aspects of the construction permit application, need not be a final design information. You could, right? Applicants could also come in with a construction permit application and ask for approval of certain portions of their design that they believe, are final and will not change as other aspects of the design progress.
Okay. Understood. Are you ready to step forward from here?
Yeah, I guess one thing I want to do, point out before we go too far off on the next topic. I understand the want to kind of refer back to the FRA on this. As I'm looking through the FRN, it still seems like the point of revising and supplementing the proposed Limited Work Authorization rule was to accommodate, discussions for Part 52. And I understand that we're still able to apply LWAs to a Part 50 application. I guess I'm just trying to, square in my mind the fact that the FRN still heavily references the Part 52. And then, I guess I'm not necessarily looking for a response from the NRC on this. I'm just trying to point out that it seems like that FRN and then the rulemaking within still has, Part 52 application in mind more so than a Part 50 application in mind.
Yeah, and I guess I would offer, these are some thoughts that you guys could write down and submit to us, and we could evaluate. We have to consult with our lawyers and on their, how, they're the gatekeepers for how we interpret the rules. But, if you have a legal theory you want to propose, we can pursue that.
All right. I guess let's step forward, and we may return to this a little bit later, but let's step forward through some of the other questions. Maybe we'll come on back. All right, so just as a reminder for folks who might not be as familiar, the LWA is required for construction activities. So there is a kind of clear dividing line between what's not construction and what is construction. It's laid out in a couple of different places. And we can move to the next slide. So the 10 CFR lays out some limits some guidance, or should say some regulations about the extent of allowed work. You can request an LWA allowing you to perform, driving piles, subsurface preparation, placement of concrete and retaining walls, and installation of the foundation. Can we go to the next slide? But there's kind of a slight difference in Reg Guide 1206, or at least some, and this sort of language appears in the Federal Register notice as well, where there's some discussion that makes it seem like, potentially the items listed in the 10 CFR 5010 are not everything you could do, but are a listing of some of the things that you could request an LWA for. So the language here says, you can fabricate, assemble, and test components in some nearby location, and then installation or integration of the SSC into the final plant location would require an LWA. And so that would indicate that installation or integration of that SSC, excuse me, would encompass kind of a wide variety of SSCs and not exclusively, just installation of the foundation. And so there's some suggestion there that you could go beyond simply, laying the foundation, so long as you had an LWA that covered that activity. I'll note that in the Federal Register notice, on that same page we were at before, it discusses the redress plan and says, the primary purpose of the redress plan is to address placement of piles and ensure removal of the foundation, which are the only activities which may be accomplished under an LWA. So the Federal Register notice is also kind of seems to suggest two different things. In this particular sentence, it says, placement of piles and installation of the foundation are the only things that may be completed under an LWA. But later on, it quotes this exact same language, saying that the same Reg Guide 1206 language that says you're allowed to construct stuff off-site, but installation on-site would require an LWA. So it's something that you guys could clarify a little bit, kind of whether there are any SSCs that could be installed in addition to pouring the foundation, if the LWA covered those activities.
So this is Carolyn Laron.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. So this is Carolyn Laron, so I'll go ahead and address that. So I would defer to the requirements in the regulations themselves, right? So you pointed out 10 CFR 50.10D1, right? And it talks about those activities, right, that would be included as part of a limited authorization request. And since you did also reference that same Federal Register notice, right, that I spoke to earlier, and it's on it starts on page 57432, the third column, the last paragraph, right? So I think you quoted part of it, right? Construction includes also includes the on-site, in-place fabrication, erection, integration, or testing activities for in-scope SSCs, right? And it did. Right, there is some language there that talks about if you, for example, assemble a pump in a warehouse, and it's right, the warehouse is located on the quote site, right? That is acceptable. You don't need an LWA for that. However, right, if you do install or integrate that pump into its final location, the Federal Register notice is clear that that would require either a construction permit or a combined license. So we do recognize that this is different from Reg Guide 1.206, Rev 1. And I think you did point that out on the slide, and that is something that we're following up on. But like I said, I would defer to the regulations, including the Federal Register notice that accompanied the promulgation of that final rule.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. I missed that. I missed that key difference between the Federal Register notice and the Reg Guide. The other question I was going to ask about is does installation of I was reviewing the CFPP LWA, and that includes installation of several items that are kind of integrated as part of the foundation, but that are not explicitly concrete or the associated rebar. They talk about components primarily serving structural or utility support purposes. So they talked about integral column anchorages, sumps and drain lines, piping and conduit, and grounding, all of which are not concrete and not rebar, but are there's electrical equipment, sumps like that. Those are kind of not. I wouldn't think of those as like placement of those aren't really placement of concrete, but are kind of part of the foundation. So I was wondering how do those fit into this? And obviously the CFPP LWA hasn't been approved yet, so we can't say that's necessarily acceptable. But I guess can you help us understand where the line is there?
So if I can offer, right, that there was extensive pre-application engagement with CFPP before they submitted their LWA. I think it covered several months of discussions with the staff in terms of the scope and of, right, understanding their business plan and their construction goals, et cetera. So I can't provide you more than that, right? So you are correct that their the carbon-free power project, LWA, has just recently been submitted and accepted by the staff for review. So now that doesn't preclude you or to engage us if those are similar plans that you would like to discuss as potential in scope items for your LWA, if that's the path that you would like to take. And we are certainly open to discussing that further and understanding if those are also goals that you would like to include.
Okay.
Yeah, we can, as we continue to develop some of our plans, we of course would continue to engage you, Carol, and the rest of the staff. And I guess really what we're almost looking for here is, if there is any identification of things that seem to be non-starters today, that helps us, develop these plans going forward. Because again, understanding what is permissible with an LWA really helps us inform our decision-making process on, what may or may not make sense to include in that LWA and what makes sense to just defer until the CPA. And so we're, again, just trying to gather our facts here for informing that future plan. So any clarification that the staff can provide is helpful and appreciated.
And the understanding that pumps are clearly off limits is a step in that direction. So we appreciate that. Okay, so we can step to the next slide 13 here. Okay, so in the event of changes, if something, we're kind of viewing the LWA as a partial CP. In the event that something changes between the LWA and the CP, we understand that in a typical Part 50 application, if there were a design change between approval of the CP and an OL application, you may need to engage with the NRC. Obviously, the OLA would include, and the FSAR that we submitted would include a discussion of any changes that happened as a result of finalizing design decisions or as a result of conditions at the site during construction. So our understanding is that as either part one of a CP or as a portion of that's submitted coincident with a CP, changes from the LWA to the LWA application to the OLA would be treated similarly to changes between the CPA and the OLA. Is that the right understanding there?
So this is Carolyn, so I can speak to this. So we do expect that there would be changes, right, from the construction, right, of the facility to the operating license application submission. So right, the staff conducts their preliminary review on the construction permit application, right? The facility is constructed. The operating license application will include the information of the as-built facility, and the staff reviews that information, right, as part of its operating license review. So unless you're seeking approval, as I mentioned previously, you can seek approval for certain portions of your design or your entire design at the construction permit phase, right? In which case, if there are changes to that portion that the staff has approved, then that would necessitate an amendment. Similarly, if you were granted an LWA for certain activities and you're in those certain activities and it's a certain scope of activities, and you expand or go outside of the scope, or if there are issues with those activities, right, that call into question the staff's conclusion and recommendation to issue the LWA, then right, you would need to submit an amendment for that, the scope of work or those changes. Am I answering your question? Is that essentially what you were?
So I guess to make sure I'm understanding it, if there were a difference between the CP and the operating license application, you know, in a traditional Part 50 approach, there was a difference between the CP and the OL, you would reflect that in the OLA. Is that, assuming that you didn't ask for finality on anything, you would reflect those changes in the OLA, obviously having pre-application engagement with the NRC. Is that correct?
Right. So you're granted a construction permit, right? You're granted a construction permit, right? You construct the facility, right? We do recognize that there will be changes, right, as you construct the facility. There will be inspectors also on site as you construct the facility, right? NRC inspectors, right? And then when you reach the point where you're submitting your operating license application, that final safety analysis report, right, provides the information, the description and the analysis of the as-built facility.
Right.
Okay.
So, and that occurs without an amendment, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. So, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, go ahead. I was responding to the time. I just wanted to do a quick time check. It is 2:30,
Sure,
close to 2:30, but that's fine. Go ahead.
Would you like to give the opportunity for public comment at this point, and then we can continue at a late, obviously we have a little bit more time blocked out. So if you'd like to give the public opportunity to comment now, and we can return afterwards.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Yeah, there's quite a number of members of the public available. So
Sure.
I'll go ahead and open for members of the public. If you do have a question or a comment for the staff at this time, we can go ahead and take them. If you are able to stay a little bit longer, we can keep the open session a little bit longer. So we do have a question from Craig Schultz. I will unmute you if you could. Or you can unmute yourself. I'm sorry, I can't unmute you. If you could go ahead and introduce yourself and provide your affiliation, and then go ahead and ask your question or comment for the staff.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. First, I would like to thank the NRC for making this meeting accessible to the public. My name is Craig Schultz. I live 50 miles from Palisades and received electricity from the plant for the entire 50 years it was in operation. As a ratepayer, I paid extra money to support the plant's operation and the decommissioning trust fund. It is evident that Holtec is not honoring its PSDAR commitments for decommissioning Palisades. Therefore, the NRC should freeze the remaining funds in the decommissioning trust fund. Regardless of whether Holtec succeeds in its speculative plans to repower the plant or build SMRs, we must safeguard the trust fund for when decommissioning begins in earnest. This trust fund isn't there for Holtec to spend while exploring miscellaneous for-profit adventures. The NRC, represented by those present here in this meeting, has a regulatory duty to enforce this issue. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. We'll make sure we capture that comment in the meeting summary. Unfortunately, I don't think we have any of the folks from the decommissioning group who could provide any perspective on the comment you provided. The next question, the next member of public who has a comment, Kevin Camps, I believe. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and proceed with your question or comment for the staff.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. My name is Kevin Camps, and I serve as radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear, and also as a board of directors member for Don't Waste Michigan, which is the statewide anti-nuclear coalition in the Great Lakes state. And I wanted to, in the strongest possible terms, urge against any shortcuts on safety or environmental protection, such as a limited work authorization or an early site permit for this tentative, speculative, greed-driven small modular reactor plan. And there are some very good reasons for this. Craig Schultz just mentioned the old reactor, which we have been calling the zombie reactor. It is still Halloween season right now. There are contaminated areas on the site. The site is small. It's 432 acres. It's immediately, of course, upon the shore of Lake Michigan, which is the drinking water supply for tens of millions of people downstream. The site itself is fragile and highly eroding. This has been the case the whole time, but never more so since historic high Lake Michigan water levels in recent years. When Krishna Singh first floated this SMR scheme in early April 2022, there was a meeting held in South Haven by the Palisades Community Advisory Panel a few days later. And at that meeting, we didn't know about the zombie reactor restart scheme yet. That would be presented later, so to speak. But we knew about this SMR trial balloon. And I said at that meeting, over my dead body, would we allow this to happen? The bait and switch alone of coming into that site for decommissioning only to then do a 180 and try to promote this. I would like to point out that the site is loose sand. It is a sand dune area. Mary Sinclair, a co-founder of Don't Waste Michigan, did point out that at least the old reactor was built on glacial till, the closest thing to a firm surface to build on, but above that is 55 feet of loose sand. That's what the dry cast storage floats on, very precariously. So to do any of this pre-construction activity messes with all of those vulnerabilities that are out there already. And I'd like to point out that Mary Sinclair also led the effort against the Midland nuclear power plant in Michigan. And what took down that plant, one reactor 90% constructed, the other 50% constructed, was a bad foundation pour, which was causing safety significant buildings to sink into the ground like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So there have been warnings about the instability of the dry cast storage by folks like Dr. Ross Landsman, Region 3 dry cast storage inspector, who has spoken repeatedly over decades about the vulnerability of the dry cast storage. So there are safety, environmental, and I would also like to add indigenous, cultural, and environmental justice risks related to all of these proposals. And I would like to ask of the NRC, there was a commitment made by the owner of Palisades at the time of the license extension in 2006 in recognition of concerns that we brought forth in coalition about the high likelihood of Native American burial sites at this Palisades nuclear power plant site. And a voluntary commitment was made by the owner at the time to proceed very cautiously with any construction activities because of the likelihood of these burials, other sacred sites, other culturally significant sites. And I would like to ask of the current owner and the NRC, will these commitments that were made those many years ago be upheld during all of these various proposals that Holtec is throwing darts at the dartboard about, the reactor restart, the SMR new builds, or have those commitments to protect likely Native American burial sites at this location simply been forgotten about? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. So I will go ahead and make sure we capture the salient points of your comments. Are there any other members of the public who have a question? I see Mary Lampert. You can go ahead and, oh, your hand went away. Did you?
No, it's still up.
Oh, okay, all right, go ahead.
Yes, what I'm concerned about is the fact that SMRs, nuclear reactors, are in effect casualties of the climate change impacts. And so I'm wondering where in the part of the review in process will the impact of climate change at the sites be reviewed. I understand the SMR-160s from reading Holtec's website are partially submerged, and therefore they would be subject to water level rise, storm surges, flooding, impacting corrosion, impacting safety. And so where in the review process is this going to begin? Because if you are slicing and dicing the review process by looking at the small segments of putting in the basement construction, etc., you're not seeing the whole picture and looking at the site as a potential vulnerability to the climate change impacts that we know to expect. So the whole irony is support for SMRs or restarting old dinosaurs like a Palisades as a response to reduce carbon climate change, when in effect what you're allowing is a type of technology that is susceptible to climate change. So that's my comment, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mary. I will capture that comment. I did want to since you were asking about where in the review the information would be considered. So there is a portion of the safety review that includes external hazards such as the flooding that you had mentioned. So that will be addressed as part of the staff's review once the application is submitted. And that information is included both in the construction permit application and also in the operating license application. But as I mentioned, right, we are still in pre-application phase. We don't have an application in-house, but I do appreciate your comment, and we will capture it also in the meeting summary.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Craig, did you have an additional question? Your hand was up earlier. I'm not sure if that's still a holdover or if you have an additional question.
I do not. I'll
Okay.
lower that hand.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next, we have Jan Bodart. I hope I said your name correctly. You may go ahead and unmute yourself, Jan, and then ask your question or make a comment.
I guess I did unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Please proceed.
Okay. My question is the feasibility of holding this meeting because at this point in time, we don't have time for anything but paying attention to climate change and how we're going to adjust our lives to the facts of climate change and what needs to be done to alleviate it. And it's shown quite clearly that nuclear power plants, not only the ones that are built, but the ones that are foolishly being contemplated, are not saviors from climate change. They are victims of climate change, as Ms. Lampert just pointed out. Especially around Lake Michigan, where the isthmuses are located close to the water, and some of them are on sand, as Kevin pointed out, and the one at Songs, or the San Onofre nuclear generating station, are very, very close to the ocean and are subject to tsunamis and other high water events. This meeting and the money spent, the time spent, the talents spent are wasted because nuclear power plants are considered to be climate solutions, and they're simply fake climate solutions. Gutierrez said we're sleepwalking into climate disaster, And I don't think we're sleepwalking into climate disaster. We're being frog walked into climate disaster by corporations that can take up the time of our agencies instead of having our agencies devoted to solutions to the climate crisis. So my summary is we should not be discussing new nuclear power plants. We should be discussing how to make all of the radioactivity that we have distributed around the United States, and especially around Illinois, we should be discussing how to make these places invulnerable, not just to climate change, but to the possible attack by unknown forces. And Zaporizhzhia is a perfect example of what's possible when we have 11 active nuclear reactors in Illinois. And all I can say is climate solutions are not radioactive. That's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. I will, as consistent with the other comments, include that in as part of the meeting summary. Oh, Michael Keegan, do you have a comment? You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Michael Keegan with Don't Waste Michigan. I take issue with the fact that the coordinates, the link, the web link for this meeting was not posted up publicly, that the onus was unfairly placed on the public to make a request for links, for phone bridge lines 3 days ahead of the scheduled meeting. We're all busy folks, and we often see these and learn about these notices at the last minute. So I want to voice that and request that these be noticed. Put the link in right away when you put the notice out there. You referenced a Federal Register notice, and I didn't get the numbers and I didn't get the date, so I need that. So if you could provide that, I'd appreciate it. I'd take that right now if you have it, and then I have a couple more comments. What is a Federal Register notice?
Sure, I'll go ahead and put that in. I'm sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
All right, okay, it's in the chat. Oh, are you dialing in? Did you want me to email this to you? Is that more convenient, or?
Could you say it verbally, slowly?
Oh, I'm sorry, sure. It's 72, right, Federal Register 57416, and the date is October 9, 2007.
Okay, thank you. I can
You're welcome.
find that. Now, regarding, I wish that I was as clear as some people seem to be on the meeting, but it seemed pretty ambiguous back and forth and a lot of wiggle room every which way. Could you please provide a list to the public, not at this moment, but soon, of all the limited work authorizations that have come through? Are we just making it up as we go along? And once money gets spent, there's going to be a lot of economic pressure to keep going. So don't front load this. There are serious environmental concerns and they need to be addressed. So I'm requesting all the limited work authorizations that have come through thus far elsewhere, so we can sort of get a table, an understanding of what's suitable, where, when, and how. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Michael. Is there anyone else? Oh, sorry, let me switch over, sorry. Are there any other members of the public who have a question or a comment for the staff? So I think we're going to go ahead and continue the discussion. If members of the public have to drop off, I apologize if the meeting has gone longer. You could send me an email. My email is on the public meeting notice. Send me an email and request to be to get access to the meeting summary once it is available. I can also provide that to you either as an attachment, a PDF, or as a link to our public Adams website. Okay, and so I don't see any other hands from members of the public. Clark or Andrew, did you want to continue with the discussion?
Sure, yep. So picking up where we left off here, we've been talking about the requirements in the event of changes. So we had established that for changes between the construction permit and the operating license application, if you don't get finality during the construction permit, then there's no amendment required. You would just update the operating license application with the as-built information. So if we were not to pursue finality in the limited work authorization, and then there were a change, I guess, would we need an amendment prior to the OLA, or would the OLA merely reflect the as-built plant as you would do for a CP?
All right, so this is Carolyn Leron, so I can go ahead and address that. And I'm sorry, I think I probably jumped in too soon earlier before we took public comments. I was trying to address both questions at the same time. So the LWA, right, once granted, authorizes by then a licensee to conduct certain work, right? And that work, the scope of work and those activities are defined as part of the LWA application and what is eventually granted by the staff. So if there are activities outside of that scope, an amendment would be needed. If there are aspects of those activities that change, that would also need to be provided to the staff in terms of an amendment. For example, if you were, and I think I can give an example, I think we do actually have a safety evaluation report. Granted, it was for an early site permit where there was certain piles that were going to be driven, and there were certain aspects of those piles that unfortunately they didn't secure sufficient amount of piles for that activity. Therefore, they had to come back to the NRC with an amendment to their LWA to secure additional pilings, right, for the activity. And part of the staff's review was to ensure that, you know, the expectations, the staff's evaluation, consistent with the original LWA application and the granting of that, or authorizing of that activity, is bounded by these new pilings that they need to complete their work. Does that make sense?
Maybe I want to make sure I heard you right there, Carolyn. Was that for an LWA or an early site permit?
For an LWA. The context that I was using, it was for an LWA associated with an early site permit.
Okay. And so I guess maybe the question that I have there, again, given, you know, Part 52 applications, the expectation for a lot of these applications is that you do have final design information for them. I just want to make sure that we're still on the same page, that you would still have that same requirement for an amendment for an LWA with a Part 50 application as well.
Right.
That's what we're hearing.
Yeah. And so, so again, I default back to the regulations themselves and also the Federal Register notice, right? So all those references, and as Michelle mentioned, right, we are open to further engagement. And certainly, right, we don't have the answer right now in terms of I guess, the difference of the document in terms of what is in the guidance in Reg I 1.206 and also in the Federal Register notice.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Okay, I guess similarly here, I guess we're bumping into a similar question where it's confusing that you could build the entire plant with preliminary design information, but building some smaller portion of the entire plant requires final design information or an amendment in the case of a change, whereas building the complete plant may not. You would simply update it in the OLA. So I think that's part of where our confusion is there. I think we understand your position on that to be that if we wanted to discuss that further or explore that further, we would need to engage in a different way, either through a white paper or I guess would future public meetings with a more defined plan from SMR be sufficient to support the additional engagement that would get us closer to an answer there?
So I think that, having the proper context in a white paper is always beneficial, right? It will also allow us more time to engage other staff as needed with, the additional details for those structures that you intend or potentially may include as part of your LWA application if you decide to proceed down that path. I think that's always helpful. But that doesn't preclude that we couldn't have an additional public meeting to discuss, the information in the white paper to gain clarity, right? And to further probe, some of the concepts that you point out in the white paper. Does that help?
I guess I'm struggling to figure out what would be different between the white paper and this meeting. I guess what sort of additional information would you be looking for in that white paper to move the conversation forward?
Well, I think, in the white paper, right, if you have certain structures that you are considering or may potentially or leaning towards, including as part of your LWA application, and you've identified, you've are looking through the requirements and think you've met them, there is a regulatory gap, and how you intend to address that gap could be part of the discussion in the white paper that the staff would then review or assess, right? Review and assess, and provide feedback on. I think that would be beneficial. It's also right, overall just understanding your plans and how this fits into your overall construction goals and schedule. I think, and I recognize that you are also trying to figure out what makes sense, but I think it's also, it's driven in both ways, right? To understand what your goals are in terms of what you want to accomplish, right? And potentially requesting an LWA. And also, right, the staff is open, and we recognize, right, the information that we have provided. We can, certainly probe that further. I think when this topic for this discussion came up, right, we were delayed a little bit, so we did have some time to further probe it. But I think, like Michelle mentioned, right, we don't have a full answer for you now, but that doesn't mean that we won't be able to give you a full answer. It's just, right, it would be helpful also to have more information from you all.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I just want to chime in on what Carolyn said. That like, you identifying the gaps and how you propose to close them, or how you're proposing to interpret the regulations would give us more to work with. Yeah, that's it. Like answering a general question like this is a bit harder.
Yeah, I guess appreciate that. I think it would take us some sitting down and thinking about what specifically we want to include in that LWA scope, and it sounds like that's essentially part of the, I shouldn't say essentially, but that's a large part of the missing piece for you guys to understand what the scope would look like. But I guess to maybe iterate what Clark's kind of getting at, we're trying to figure out, if we say that we wanted to pour concrete for the foundation of containment, and that alone is in our LWA, how that changes the answer to some of the questions we have in here, because I think our position still what we would intend to take would be, we don't think we need to provide final design information for those containment foundations, and we do think there should be some flexibility consistent with what's available in Part 50 CPA application. I mean, if we need to go write that down in a white paper and submit it to you guys to engage that way, something we can kind of think about doing going forward. It's just hard for us to understand why that, I guess, moves the needle for our understanding. You guys might have a better response. And I guess I'll also kind of add, I think we've shared with you already that we have our goal of submitting our construction permit application sometime in the mid-2026 timeframe. We have a goal of, potentially starting construction as early as the end of 2027. I still kind of struggle to also see how, understanding those goals a little bit more and maybe the complete construction schedules helps influence, the responses towards interpreting the regulation. But again, if that's something that, would be beneficial for you all to see, it's something we can consider to put together and package up for you guys.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is Carolyn Ron. Yes, yeah. Sorry, I wasn't sure if others were going to speak. Yes, I think that would be helpful. I think understanding, what your goals overall, right? And like I mentioned, right, with CFPP, and I think it's out in the public domain, right? The schedule is different from the generic schedule that's posted on the NRC public site, and that was primarily driven, right? There was extensive pre-application engagement, right, over the course of several months. Right, and understanding what their plans are and what their construction goals are. So I think that would also help further inform, and understanding the scope of the activities that you would like to include or potentially are considering or leaning towards including as part of an LWA. If you decide to go down that path, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, Carolyn, and that would absolutely be our intention once we decide that this is a pathway we want to take. I think what you're maybe hearing from us is a little bit of reluctance to do a lot of that work initially, only to find out this isn't a pathway we want to take because of the limitations within the regulations themselves. That's why we're really pushing on to understand what is feasible in the regulation. But again, it's something that we can take back and consider putting together and having further engagements on.
Okay, great. Were there any other comments from the NRC staff? I wasn't sure.
I was just going to mention the scope piece, but then you said it, so sorry.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks, Laura. Okay. Clark, did you want to proceed?
The remainder of the slides in there are just some backups that I put together for to kind of lay out the parts of the regulation and or regulatory guidance that were germane, but I didn't have anything else to cover. I think we're all set on our end.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I guess maybe before we do that, I'll note we do have a number of staff on the line today. I don't know if anyone else from the Holtec staff has any questions or comments they wanted to bring up. Okay, I'm here.
Okay, I don't see any hands raised either. Okay, so I think there are still some members of the public who are on the call. If those members of the public, if you haven't reached out to me directly to get the meeting information and you would like to be included as part of the meeting attendee list, please send me a quick email. Again, my email is on the public meeting notice, and I'll make sure to include you on the meeting attendee list. Are there any final comments from the staff or SMR Holtec? Hearing none. Andrew, are we expecting to discuss any proprietary information during the closed session? Essentially, will we still be needing the closed session?
I don't see a need for the closed session today, Carolyn. Thanks.
Okay, great. Okay, so I just wanted to thank everyone for their participation in the meeting, for the members of the public, for your comments. There are any follow-up questions or concerns, please feel free to send a message to via email to the contacts on the list. I am one of them. And with that, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. We really appreciate you guys working with us on this and helping us to understand.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Thanks.
You're welcome.